What's going on, church family? Hey, I'm here with Dr. Peter Jacobsen from Ottawa University, also a brother in Christ and also someone who is part of our church family. As you know, we have just wrapped up the series, Did God Really Say? Working through cultural issues in the month of May. And last week, we rounded the corner and finished the series as we addressed the issue of Marxism. Now, earlier this past week, I recorded a video titled More on Marxism, because during the sermon, there's only so much that you can say on a subject as big as Marxism. And of course, we addressed it from a biblical vantage point and things of that nature, but so much more can be said. I've asked Peter to come in and do this short video with me. This is going to be called More on Marxism Part 2. So I would love for you all just to give Peter your time. And Peter, why don't we just start talking? What are some other things, some additional things that we can say about Marxism, maybe from its roots, its background, how you divide up differing ideologies within the camp? Why don't you kick it off for us?
Sure. So I think a good timeline to focus on with Marxism is to worry or focus on how the economists surrounding Marxist theories have kind of changed their views over time. I actually think that can explain a lot of where we're at today. So kind of a big date to keep in mind is in 1920, the year 1920.
100 years ago.
Yeah, 100 years ago. That's right, 100-year anniversary. An economist, an Austrian-born economist, actually had to flee his home country when the Nazis took over because he was a Jewish economist, and so he took all of he could and came to America. But his name was Ludwig von Mises. He forwarded an idea that shouldn't be surprising to us if we recognize, by the way, that Marxism is incompatible with the Bible. We also know that really it's not compatible with reality either, or success or prospering. We know that deviating from God's word is going to have some real world consequences.
Always.
And so Mises had an argument about how economically this would happen. What Mises pointed out is a lot of people say that Marxism doesn't work because there's not the right incentives. And so if you give everyone, pay no matter what, and Dakota mentioned this during his sermon as well, they're not going to have an incentive to work hard. Everyone's kind of trying to live off each other. And so that's true. And Mises said that there's even more issues. So Marx actually recognized this and he had a response to this. He said, well, under socialism, we will create a new socialist man. And so when everyone lives in the perfect social structure of Marxism and communism, then everyone's going to become other-focused. Yep. They're going to become perfect, sanctified almost.
All the needs are met.
That's right, yeah. So they become good people. And so we don't have to worry about incentive problems. We don't have to worry about people being lazy. They're going to be good. That was Marx's response. This was called socialist man. So this was an explicit response. Well, what Mises did is said, well, even if that were true, which Mises didn't believe it was, and by the way, one nice thing is that kind of no one believes that's true anymore. I even have some friends who have stumbled down these roads from college and looked at Marxism, and I say, yeah, but what about all this stuff about like socialist man? Like, do you believe this? I mean, one nice thing is that, people really don't buy this anymore. Yeah. But Mises said, let's even assume that's true. Let's give you that. Let's ignore the fact that this is, directly against what we know to be true in the past. Let's ignore the fact that there's no incentive. There's another problem with Marxism. And that problem is that Marxism doesn't generate the real knowledge that's needed for an economy to succeed. And so this is a kind of a knowledge-based argument, and it goes something like this. At the center of Marxism, the most important piece of Marxism, what makes a socialist government socialist or a communist society communist, is that the means of production, capital goods, machines, you could call them whatever, companies, are owned by everyone. Everyone owns the companies, everyone owns machines, no one is the owner of anything in particular. And you might have your own toothbrush, but you don't own your own factory. That's right. Not possible.
It's a sin, essentially, to own anything in the Marxist framework.
That's exactly right. If you're owning, you're stealing. That's their view.
Yeah.
That ownership really is theft.
From the common man.
Yeah, exactly. Because, all of the earth is ours, and so all the capital should be ours, and you're stealing from laborers.
Yep.
But the problem with this that Mises points out is if everyone owns capital goods, and by extension, no one owns capital goods, no one has a factory or a machine or anything, then you can't buy and sell machines or capital goods. And if you can't buy and sell machines or capital goods, then you actually don't have any prices for them.
Yeah.
And so this makes a really, really big
It
problem.
removes all value.
Yeah, that's there's all value and all ways to measure value in a way that's meaningful to people.
Yep.
And so like the classic problem that Mises points out is that like what should we build railroad tracks with? Should we build them with iron or platinum? And so I ask my students this every semester. I ask them, well, what do we build them with? Platinum, by the way, is a better metal for building railroad tracks. It's more efficient. You're going to have less friction. If we had all the platinum in the world, we should build all the railroad tracks with platinum. And so I ask my students, why don't we? And they say, because it's more expensive. But the only way that you can know platinum is more expensive, or how much more expensive platinum is, because, you know, sometimes if it were a penny more, obviously, if it were a little more expensive, it's probably still worth it.
Yeah, it's a wash.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the only way we know that is because we can own platinum and we can own railroad tracks and we can buy and sell them.
Yep, there's a freedom.
That's right.
To buy and sell.
Yeah. And so that knowledge that comes about by buying and selling, and in that process, that knowledge that comes about can't exist without the process itself. And so in Marxism, there's actually no way to have ownership or value of capital. Now apply this to every single thing. You know, should we build buildings out of, you know, wood foundations, metal foundations, you know, should we, pour concrete for the foundations? What should we frame things with? I mean, all of these questions are questions that business owners make, or decisions that business owners make rather, and they do it with reference to prices. That's how business owners make decisions. If, you know, steel is too expensive, you go with something else. So you can't really function without those prices. And so, you know, that this big argument happened in the 1920s, and the response to Mises was, well, look, here's a bunch of equations that explain how we can figure out what the prices would be. And Mises, one more time responded, though, was ignored. It's sort of like trying to teach someone to ride a bike by giving them a list of equations of how much like force they can put on each side. You learn a bike through the process of riding a bike. You learn prices through the process of competing. And so there's no way that you can back this out. And the evidence of this happens. You know, a lot of the members of the church will remember the fall of the Soviet Union. And one thing that our generation forgets is how unexpected it was. One of the most famous...
of course it was going to happen.
Everyone just thinks that, well, yeah, this was an authoritarian, it fell apart. But one of the most famous economists at the time, Paul Samuelson, thought that the Soviet Union was going to overtake the U.S. And in his textbook for over a decade, he was saying, it's going to happen within the next 2 years. And he kind of just kept pushing the date back. And, another economist who was a student of Mises had since passed away, Murray Rothbard, pointed out, like, the reason Soviet economic numbers look so good is because any economy can produce a lot of stuff, but you can't produce valuable stuff unless you have prices. Rothbard was right because Mises was right. He understood that. And so ultimately, you know, even if, you know, Marxism was correct about people becoming perfect angels, which we know that it's not, there still wouldn't be an ability for Marxism to work because it requires you to have knowledge that's generated by the very process that Marxism refuses you to take part in.
Absolutely. So you've got the economist picture, right? And then you have the knowledge-based argument. Is that how you're divvying up the two?
Yeah, I think there's sort of an incentive-based argument and a knowledge-based argument. Is that market activity requires certain incentives, and we know that, you know, Marxism doesn't generate the right incentives. And also, in order to have proper market activity, you have to have the right knowledge. And so there's knowledge and incentive-based, and both of those are fundamental critiques of Marxism from the very get-go. You can't have a successful system if you can't get
well,
those
and the only
right.
people who truly benefit are those on top, of course. And as I noted on Sunday, they'll argue for equality of all and equal outcome for all. But what they won't tell you is everyone is poor across the board in that system, right? Something that I find as it's relatable to the Bible as we just start to wrap this up is this idea. I want to go back to this that you mentioned about the socialist man. Francis Schaeffer spoke about this in his videos that he made. I believe it was done in the 1970s, possibly the 1960s. But if you want a really good set of educational videos to watch, they are called How Now Shall We Then Live by Francis Schaeffer. You can find it on YouTube. There's about 10 to 12 videos, and he speaks about each of these issues back then. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. But the idea that society keeps aiming towards this utopian ideal where everyone's going to love each other and everybody is going to be perfectly sharing with one another, and, you know, as long as all of the needs are met, then there will be no more crime, no more problems, no more sin. Right? It is just a big fat lie, because really as long as man continues to exalt himself, then you cannot have a culture in which mankind doesn't exalt themselves. Inherently, in our sin nature, we want it to be about us. We want to deify ourselves, elevate ourselves. And because there's something wrong with our nature, then you can never have a society set in place that's truly utopian at the core. Unless, of course, you have a group of people who become born again, changed in the heart, transformed in the heart, become a part of a whole new kingdom with Jesus at the helm. So, hey, this is Marxism continued, or more on Marxism part 2. Dr. Peter Jacobsen, we need to do this again sometime.
Sure, be happy to.
All right. Hey, church family, thanks for listening. Hope you all have a great day.